Hello,
Hey, how's it going?
can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me? Hey there, thanks for joining me today.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
Sitting on my porch trying to keep 6 feet away from everyone. Yeah, a little bit of the
Is that hard to
quarantining.
do? Are there a lot of people around?
No, I would say as like a trans woman of color, I have learned how to distance myself well before social distancing was a thing. So, yeah, it's not really rough for me.
Do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kamryn Jerrel. I am the current co-chair and lead consultant of a group called Legion. It's League for Equity of Gender in Our Neighborhoods. And what we primarily do is we center ourselves around advocating for trans employment and combating discrimination and things that are linked to trans employment in the Rochester area. Simple enough.
When did that start?
That started a year and a week ago of being a trans person who has been employed by several employers in the Rochester area. I became very frustrated with the plight that I was being dealt with after like keeping the same job for almost 20 years and then coming out as trans and then having to go through 9 different employers. I became fed up with the response. I became fed up with the stereotyping, and I spoke with a group of people and decided that we should do something to change that.
I think when you're experiencing that level of just like constant and unrelenting discrimination, the idea of like doing something and turning it around to something positive is like, it's really intense.
Never let anybody say anger doesn't motivate you, because that's what happened. I just want to be totally truthful and honest about the situation and how it came to be. I got upset. I got really upset, and I dwelled in a very angry place for a while, and I realized that wasn't conducive to change, and that if I focused that anger into organization and trying to unify others who had had the same experiences, that maybe we would be able to combat these things head on. Our number one goal is to unify trans people of all color, but primarily to prop up trans women of color, seeing as though the disparity for us is just the end all of intersectionality. Being a trans woman of color, being pansexual, being a pagan, I have had to deal with lots of things in the workplace. And my number one goal when I sat down was, it was just going to be an employment kind of like meeting where we talked about some things that were going on in our respective jobs. And it turned into a question of, why can't we make these things happen on our own? And that's kind of where everything jumped off from.
So what kind of things are you wanting to make happen on your own? What does that look like?
What we want to make happen on our own is we want, one, have the ability to consult for ourselves, have the ability to speak up and advocate for ourselves in these workplaces. You'd be surprised. A lot of people have the equal opportunity sticker on their doors of employment and don't understand trans issues in their entirety. There's a lot of stereotypical things being said, a lot of very problematic things being said in some of these meetings. And my number one thing is a phrase that I coined. I want like to face liability and risk reduction in HR head on, because when things happen to trans people, especially trans women of color in the workplace, and they report it to HR, there's this mechanism that automatically initiates. And it's not a mechanism to make changes or to make things equitable. That thing is to lower liability and legal risk when it comes to dealing with that person, instead of handling the problem and bringing about change in a culture that is actually diverse. It becomes divisive and pervasive, and then the trans person is gaslit until they're either fired or they quit.
not something that's like productive, like, oh, we see that things are going wrong here. Let's work together to try to figure them out. But let's try to undermine what it is that you have to say and make it hard for you to work here. And maybe the problem will just go away on its own.
Right, and they do that by they test your character, they test your emotions. Being a trans person in these days and times is already a very emotional thing, and sometimes can feel very overwhelming and lonely when it comes to like transitioning into a new job and being around new people. And you hear things like buzzwords like compromise and temperament and tone. And when I first started dealing with these problems, I'm a very emotional creature. At this very moment, I'm trying not to curse. When I first started dealing with these problems, I didn't have the wherewithal to know that my emotions were being played with and that I was being set up to fail, kind of like they were lighting fuses and I couldn't see them. I learned over time, and I've been able to explain to other trans people the mechanism in which we're speaking about right now and how it works and how to combat it, and how to be aware of your feelings, be aware of what's happening to you, be aware of policies that are going on, be aware of what's being said, how you can document those things, just trying to make it so that there's some kind of person there to listen to them that says, hey, I know what you've been through and this is what worked for me. Maybe try some of these things and don't allow these things to happen to you.
So that's one of the purposes that Legion serves, is to provide that sort of like peer support and peer mentorship.
Yeah, peer support, peer mentorship, peer advocacy is what we're working on right now. There is barriers in our way. There are gatekeepers who don't want this kind of work to happen, because then that's the people speaking for themselves, and there's still this need for credentials in this day and time, and people don't take trans life experience as a credential. So what we've done is we've started building a training manual together. We've also started taking classes to learn more about how to advocate and learn how to run those classes, safe zone trainings, things of that matter, learning how to infuse ourselves into those conversations about us so that we make sure that they're being steered in the right directions. I've dealt with, not to get into a lot of detail, but I've sat through lots of trainings at these employers that I will not name, and a lot of the things are, a lot of the focus is convenience. Oh, it's hard for them to get used to you. Oh, you got to give people time for this. You have to allow mistakes. People can't be perfect. Those are things that you'll hear, and those things are undermining your identity. And they can be angering, but hear where they're coming from, know what it is, and then learn to maneuver around it. So you keep yourself safe enough to, one, start seeing those changes happen, or two, be able to defend yourself when they don't.
I've been thinking about that a lot, how, when we're talking about racism, so much of the conversation is like centered around whiteness and what racism means to white people and how racism impacts white people, and like explaining racism in a way that's palatable to white people, right? A way that doesn't like injure fragile egos, bite-sized pieces, and that sort of thing. And it seems like when we're talking about trans issues, it really is like a cisgender-centered approach of how can we talk about transphobia in a way that cisgender people will understand, in a way that's palatable, in a way that will make them at least pretend to care, even if they don't understand it, And what does that look like? And is that doing us any favors? Is it doing us any favors to always approach it as like, how do we get the cisgender people on board? Because that's what's happening in your workplaces, right? They're like, okay, audience
it's always
non-transgender
it's always
people.
kind of like it's always an audience of non-transgender people, and what you have to deal with is you have to tiptoe through that minefield of ego and hurt feelings and newfound victimhood, And it is not doing trans people any favors at the time, because once again, we're being victimized, and they're entitled to this education that is centered around common courtesy and humanity and respect. And what we're sitting there dealing with is we're dealing with myth, we're dealing with stereotype, and then we have to, one, be open to questions that might be problematic. We have to be open to statements that are borderline hurtful, and we have to do it with a smile on our faces. I've learned from being a Black person that trying to explain racism to a white person is already kind of a failing attempt, because let's be real, like, I have to make you believe that it's happening, or am I supposed to give you a definition of what it is? Because you could literally turn on
Right.
the TV and see it every day.
Right. It's like, oh, this has a name. Its name is racism.
Right. And just
We're
like
all
with
complicit in it.
transphobia,
Like,
you'll get a lot of people. There are parallels between racism and transphobia. Some people say, oh, you're just looking for racial stuff. You'll hear the same things about trans people. Oh, you're just looking for transphobia to happen. Racism causes trauma. Transphobia causes trauma. They both bring about trauma in the person who has to deal with them. To then be asked, or not even asked, but like commanded to be like, hey, tell me why this is racist, and why I have to concur that it is. Like it's a circular like argument, and it's like really like the thing about transphobia is it's not brand new. Trans people aren't brand new. I know a lot of people in 2020 want to say, well, it's a new thing and people are just getting used to it. Well, we've existed since the beginning of time, just like brown people have been around since the beginning of time. And I sometimes find it offensive that I not only have to deal with verbal assault, emotional assault, dysphoria, and transphobia, but I also have to provide you with an education after the fact. There's this feeling inside you when you say things where you know it's wrong. It's either you meant to do it or it was by accident, but you know it's wrong. And I don't feel like coddling people anymore. I just don't. And that's kind of like the reputation that I have as the air quotes leader of Legion. I am a no nonsense, straight to the point, let's pull this band-aid completely off type of girl. And I don't want to have these superficial conversations about something that is causing trauma to people.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is, like you said, it's been around forever. It's not new. We are not new. These issues are not new. If anything, we finally gained some like traction and visibility, right? But visibility may or may not be doing us much favors, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, when it comes to the visibility, there's lots of visibility. Now they know that trans people and gender-expansive people exist on a spectrum. And even in that right, we have to deal with things, because once you're trans, you're expected to fall into masculine or feminine roles completely. Like you have to become this thing that they envision you being to be valid. And when you're not is when you're faced with large amounts of transphobia, large amounts of harassment, hate speech, violence. Those things come up because you're not fulfilling what they believe a good trans person would be based upon solely your appearance. And the trans people exist among a spectrum. I've heard some really horrible things at past employers. I've heard your voice is too deep for me to respect you as a woman. I've heard your shoulders are too broad. I've heard maybe you should get face work done, then people wouldn't pick on you so much. Or maybe you should do something about your body. Or hey, have you ever thought about surgeries? Those kind of things are being said to us, and it's the lack of self-autonomy and just outright disrespect that you have to deal with on a daily basis. And then you're supposed to do it with a smile. And I know how hurtful it is, and I see other trans women going through it. And I figured with the help of yourself and several other people within our community, that one, like unifying and knowing that we're not alone in these situations, that we've all experienced these things on certain degrees, microaggressions, violence, we've all experienced that. But if we all come together and we move as one, then there's it's more of a chance that we'll be heard. There's more damage that we'll do. And when I say damage, I mean like destroying the patriarchy. I mean like uplifting trans people and having our humanity recognized, period. Like it shouldn't be these oh well, if you do this way, then we'll respect you more. It shouldn't be that kind of thing. I'm trans, I'm a trans woman, I'm a trans woman of color, I work here. There are policies that are set up to protect all of us. I want to make sure that they're protecting me.
And the power of many. It's no wonder that the name Legion came about, right? For the organization.
Yes, the name Legion was inspired by a demon. Inspired by a folklore from my family, and I guess it's in the Bible too. I'm not really sure, but there's this group of demons that work together for a single focus, for a single goal. Its name is Legion because it is many. It is more than one entity. It is more than one identity. But they all have one single focus, one single goal, and that's what Legion came from. From one, we are many.
I was talking last week with Kiara St. James. Do you know who that is?
No, I did watch that, but I'm not familiar.
Yeah, she's incredible. So she and I are from the same hometown in Southeast Texas. She moved to New York City years ago and has been a really active leader in the trans community in New York City and across New York State. And she's the executive director of the New York Trans Advocacy Group, or NITAG. And a lot of what she is thinking about these days is like trans futures, you know, like, okay, so this is what it's been like. This is what it's like now. Where are we going? What are we doing? Where do we want to be? And especially in this moment with the pandemic, with everything sort of forcibly paused, forcibly changed, forcibly like putting people on their ass and saying, hold on a minute, you know, let's second guess everything that we thought was normal. How can we leverage this moment to get to a new kind of future that we want to see for ourselves, and what does that look like for trans people? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I would say use this time where we have all this extra time in our hand to strengthen the ties that bind us. Realize that we all have the same plight. Realize that this has all affected us to a certain degree, and there are those within our community who are suffering more due to the disparities of the new essential worker. Realize that, recognize that we have to lift each other up, recognize that we can't just keep using the disparities of Black trans women as a talking point, that we now have to do something about it. Now that it's been said enough, we all have to start lifting each other up. And that includes myself, not just saying it because I am a trans woman of color, but if I have something that can help someone else, I need to use that to lift them up. And we need to start lifting each other up and making each other see each other's value, shielding each other from the world's disparities. And then we need to start moving forward as a singular mind unit, tackling things like healthcare, work disparity, police brutality, the murders of trans people in general, but more specifically, the murders of trans women. We have to have outreaches that teach about hormones and safeguard our medical needs. We have to have the ability to talk about how insurance has pigeonholed some of us to where we are suffering from emotional damage because what we need is not seen as medically necessary. There's so many things in the future that we could be doing, but those are small things that we can start working on as little small groups and then joining together. I would feel great if Legion got big enough to where we would be able to reach out to New York and be like, hey, we have this thing going on and we're doing this. We would like to train you guys on this. Can you train us on what you're doing in New York? Kind of like start networking and figuring out ways to like make advocacy and activism for trans people a solid network. Because what's going on is the hateful around us, the ones who don't want us to exist, have that network already.
And we have to be able to match it and
we have to be able to
surpass
we have to be able to, right, we need to be able to meet it and overcome it, and we can only do that when we're all working together. These little this infighting that's happening between white trans women and black trans women, that needs to stop. This class war that happens between the passable and the not so passable, that needs to stop. Gatekeeping, that needs to stop. Like, all of those things need to stop. Like, for us to be seen, for us to push forward into the future, we have to move together, we have to care for each other, and we have to be real about it. Like, no more of these side conversations about, oh, this person can't afford this surgery, or, oh, this person doesn't have this support. We have to realize that being trans right now, we are the modern day cryptids on, like, walking around on this planet. To some people, I'm an abominable snowman. To some people, I am the Loch Ness monster. But we have to start being visible. We have to start being vocal. We have to start standing up for ourselves, and we have to start doing it together.
What do you think it'll take for the folks who are on the sidelines, or the folks who are having sort of infighting? What will it take for us to feel that need to unite, and that sense of unity and solidarity? What's holding us back?
Well, we can't say a crucial death, because that happens all the time. So what's holding us back is large groups of leaders who are willing to work with each other and be like, these are the rules, this is what we're not going to tolerate. We are moving forward in the pursuit of our freedoms and our equity, and we have to do that together. And if you are not on board, then we have to leave you. We can't drag you into the future.
Yeah, we got to get people who are willing and ready to jump in and just do the thing.
You also need leaders who are willing to be martyrs. I know that sounds like really dark, but I mean, like, career-wise, social standing. Like, ever since I started, like, this journey of moving forward as an activist and an advocate, there have been pitfalls that have damaged my life. I have to be able to face those head on, knowing that those things come on the downswing, preparing for the upswing. So you have to be prepared as a leader to know that there's going to be a lot of pressure. It's going to be a lot of lonely nights. It's going to be a lot of heartache. It's going to be a lot of crying. It's going to be a lot of all of those things, but all of those things make it worth it in the end. And who knows what the end game might be. I might not live to see the end game, but I want to push towards it. It's a reality. Most people think it's macabre to think that way, but it's a reality. I am a trans woman who is older than 35 years old. I am almost 5 years past my life expectancy. I have suffered humongous financial loss. I have suffered humongous family and emotional loss. And knowing that all of those things happen, I still feel like who I am was worth all of it. And we have to find like-minded leaders in our community who are willing to put the, for lack of a better word, bullshit aside, and figure out that there's going to be some sacrifice involved in fighting, and then move forward.
And a lot of it has to do with privilege, right? Like, the folks who don't have to grapple with the things you're talking about on a daily basis, maybe because it's passing privilege or white privilege or transmasculine privilege, you know,
financial privilege,
degree privilege, right? All sorts of things. You know, we have to be able to put that stuff on the line and show up and get behind these causes. I think part of it becomes a problem when the folks with a lot of privilege get in front of the causes and lead the way in a way that's really silencing to the people most impacted by the issues that you're fighting. And it actually ends up shutting out a lot of voices and experience and leadership that otherwise really should be at the front of the line. So helping folks with privilege realize that there are a lot of ways to support without getting to the front. You know, supporting from behind, supporting from the side.
That's another battle. That's another thing that comes with the lack of understanding of intersectionality. We still have to provide some privileged people with an education on what privilege is. Some people think that because they grew up rough, they don't have a certain amount of privilege. Some people think that because they lived in a certain area, they don't have privilege. Because they're married to a certain person, they don't have privilege. Privilege, privilege is prevalent in our community. Privilege is a barrier, and it's something that we shouldn't have to waste time on speaking about, but we still do. It's the year 2020. The whole idea of privilege has been coined a phrase for decades now, and you hear it more often than not on a daily basis in just regular conversations. And here we are, we're still explaining to trans white women that you still have a certain level of privilege. If even in this COVID environment, a trans white woman can go to the hospital and she might have to deal with some things.
Her likelihood of being believed and treated appropriately is better than yours.
Yep. Yeah. It's way higher than mine.
Yeah.
Trans masculine people. There's a certain amount of and it's still there. They do have their disparities, but there is a privilege when it comes to a trans masc white male versus a trans femme black woman. There's privilege there, and a lot of people don't want to talk to it. They feel guilty about it. Don't feel guilty about it. It's not something you asked for. It's something you were born with. But once you realize that it's something that you were born with and it's something that you possess, what you do with it can either become detrimental to other people, or it can become a means of helping others, a tool. Learning when to step up, learning when to pull back, learning when to recognize the differences between lifestyle and upbringing and culture. Once you realize that those things are happening, then the only person you can hold accountable for the use of your privilege is yourself. And don't feel upset about it when someone calls you on it.
Absolutely. There's a tendency to get defensive because if we think of privilege as meaning that you're a bad person, or that you have something that you don't deserve, right, you get defensive. But truth is, that's exactly what it is you have something you don't deserve, you just have it. And then the question becomes, well, what do you do with it? You know, how are you wielding it to combat the inequity around you, you know? And that's the call in, that's the call to action. It's like, right, come join us, use your privilege, do some good, you know, give back so that we can all be free.
Right. Or you can just sit in your privilege and wallow in it. And when you get called on it, you can get upset. Like, I really believe that there's a certain level of privilege that everyone possesses. Even myself, I identified as male for a very long time. I was an athlete. I was what they would call an alpha. And I gleaned privileges from being that, from even acting that way. I gleaned privilege from it. And I had to realize what those privileges were. And I had to realize that I was either going to use them to help others or I was going to use them to my advantage. And I chose to use those tools to help others. Even when I wasn't identifying openly as trans, I used this privilege that I did not want, but was born with, to help others. And that's just a decision that a person has to make. But we're not going to sit and argue with you over, oh, I was raised poor, how could I have privilege? Well, when you get into a car accident on the side of the road and a cop pulls up, do you ever have to think about, am I going to be murdered? When you reach into your pocketbook and you can't seem to find your identification or your credit card at a cashier, are they assuming that you're going to steal? Like, it's those kind of things that you have to like educate people on. People think that privilege is based upon finances alone. They think it's about what neighborhood you grew up in and all those things. But it's a mixture of all of that stuff. It's a mixture of culture. It's a mixture of finances. It's a mixture of social standing. It's all of those things. There's not one specific thing. So if you don't hit the mark for finances, you still don't get beat up by the police. You still don't have to worry about getting murdered. Privilege. Like,
Kamryn, where can people find more information about Legion? if they want to learn more about it or get involved or support.
We have a Facebook page. We have a Facebook group. But if you want to reach out to me specifically, I'll be able to get you hooked up. We'll
Awesome.
talk things over, see what direction you want to go, what you would like to learn, how you can contribute, and we'll get you started.
Does Legion have its own email address too?
Legion does have its own email address. I am drawing a blank right now. Do you remember it? Do you know it?
Hold on, I'll go
terrible.
look. It's rocklegion19@gmail.com. It's ROCLEGION19@gmail.com. And there is a website, but I think it's still in production. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it's still in production. We are also still working on our training manual. We have been working on it for the better part of a year. We just want to make sure we get it solidified and get it like tacked down so that there's no loopholes. This training manual is centered around rapid response. There's a lot of turmoil and a lot of stress that a person goes through when they're confronted with the first instance of blatant discrimination and transphobia in their workplace. You kind of don't know what to do. You kind of don't know where to go. What we're doing is we're setting up a training manual for our members so that we'll be able to advocate for you and tell you the things that you need to know in that instance. Also, be there as a sounding board so we can hear what's happening to you in that moment. We can guide you through it, and we can make sure that you're safe and that you're being advocated for and you're being listened to. Setting up this manual so that we have a uniform, even though on a case-by-case basis, transphobia and microaggression looks very different. We want everybody to be thinking in the same mindset that we're here to help, we're here to advocate, we're here to listen primarily, and we're here to give you a place to vent so that you don't do it in the workplace. The number one thing that's being used against trans women and men is this new title called aggression. All of a sudden, we're all aggressive. We're all super aggressive.
What are you aggressive about?
When you say things like, hey, can you not misgender me hundreds of times a day? Hey, can you not talk about my genitals? Hey, can you not ask me about surgeries? Hey, can you not ask me about my sex partners? Can you not ask me how I have sex? When you answer those questions or you ask those kind of questions, it doesn't matter the tone. It doesn't matter if you're composed. It doesn't matter how much inner searching you do before saying anything. You will always be seen as aggressive. And the way to combat that is to know that it's going to happen and not to let it make you aggressive, not to get gaslit by these terms like tone. Tone is often used against trans women. Tone is a word they use to tell you that your voice doesn't fit the feminine spectrum norm. So what they do is instead of saying that we don't respect what you have to say because your voice is so deep, or we don't align you with the gender you tell us you are because your voice is so deep, what they'll say is, well, a lot of people feel that you have a tone. There's a tone to the things you say. And that's them telling you that your voice isn't fit the mold and that they would like you to be silent so that they can feel comfortable. If you don't talk, then you might not be misgendered as much.
For folks who don't know, what is gaslighting? Because you've brought it up a couple of times. I mean, you're describing it, you're giving examples, but can you say what it is?
Gaslighting is an offensive, often used by people when they're being confronted with things. I don't know the Webster's dictionary of it, but I know how it works. The mechanism itself is, I say, hey, can you not? And then you attack with, well, it's not my fault that these things are happening. Maybe if you worked on your voice, maybe if you were a little shorter, maybe if your body was more feminine. It's those kind of things. It's attacking your psyche and making you second guess the things you say until you start to kind of go crazy.
Right. So it's
gaslighting.
Yeah, this idea that like you brought this upon yourself. It's in your imagination. It's your own fault that you're hurting. It's your own fault that I'm offending you.
Right.
Basically. Yeah. And yeah, making you feel like you're nuts, right? You're like, wait, is it my own fault? Did I bring this on myself? Do I deserve racism? Right. Do I deserve transphobia? Oh, I guess I do.
It's used by every kind of ism that you have to face on a daily basis. It is a tool. It is a tool in their tool belt. Gaslighting is the number one weapon used. It makes you second guess yourself. Well, was I talking loud? Was I being aggressive? Am I moving too manly or too feminine? Are my hands too big? Like it's things like that. They make you believe that because you're standing up for yourself, that you're taking it overboard because this is solely your problem and not theirs.
What would you say is just sort of a call to action for folks? Like I imagine a lot of people watching are maybe cisgender, probably people that I know who, in seeing me post this on Facebook, are like, oh, I'll go check out this conversation. What would you want them to, it's like a final thought you'd want them to know or think about as they're moving forward from here? What can they do to support trans people?
I'd say to cis people who want to support us, foster our movement, foster our dreams, stand beside us when these things are happening. Take people to task when you see something wrong. Like, realize that difference is what's being attacked here. It's not the fact that I am trans, it is the fact that I am different. And once they get rid of my difference, then your difference is next.
Love it. Just thinking about foster our dreams. What a powerful thing, right? Like, I feel like as trans people, we get reduced to the hardships that we have. So much of conversations around trans people are like how hard everything is and how we're wronged and the barriers that are in place. And we don't even get to the part where we're talking about anything beyond like mere survival, right? We're not talking about dreams.
Right.
We're not talking about, you know, our vision for our future and the things, the skills and the talents we have and what makes us feel a lot of joy and exhilaration. We don't even get to that, right? We're still talking about basic human decency, and dignity, and respect.
Basic need.
And basic need.
My dream when I was younger was to become a professional wrestler and be known all around the world. Now my dream is to exist on a daily basis with a monochrome of happiness. When I say foster our dreams, a lot of our dreams is just to be able to walk through a day without feeling the need to hide or feeling like we're going to be harmed for being ourselves. And the most that you can do is see us in those moments. And when someone is trying to affront those things, you help us, defend us. So many of my trans brothers and sisters died alone in a crowded space. When you see these things happening, when you see people going out of their way to be hateful, going out of their way to be violent towards us, stand up. Speak out. You don't necessarily have to physically fight someone, but just sometimes just people knowing that that trans person in that moment is not alone is enough for them to be left alone. Educate yourself.
Seems so simple.
Okay? Educate yourself so that we don't have to constantly be holding your hand while we're trying to fight this uphill battle. You either need to match our gait on our way up this hill, or we got to leave you behind because I can't drag you up the hill while I'm trying to fight. I only have two hands.
Thank you, Kamryn. Thank you for sharing some of your time and some of your vision and some of your brilliance. It's I've had the pleasure of knowing you now for 5 years, almost 5 years.
Yeah, almost.
And you know, I've gotten a chance to work with you really closely and like see your journey, but also see you grow into your leadership. Anytime I have an opportunity to hear you speak, it just really gives me chills, it gives me hope, and it like inspires me to fight harder, which is what it's all about, right? We got to get off our asses and just keep on fighting and do the damn thing. So
right.
Thank you for everything that you do, and thank you for all the amazing things that you share with the world. I really appreciate you.
I appreciate you. Thank you very much for being around. And just like when you first met me, I was just a shell of what I am now. I was quivering, crying mess because I just felt hurt by everything that was going on. But I built this skin, and I didn't see my own worth as a speaker. I didn't see my own worth. I even fight against it to this day as a leader. I don't really see myself as those things, but I step into that role, and it's because people like you and the rest of the group believe in me, and that's enough to propel me forward.
yeah, we need each other now more than ever, I think, to remind us what we're worth.
Right.
We're our own worst enemy sometimes, and it's not because of, we don't have self-esteem, but we're surrounded by less than esteemable people in the society who tell us that we're not worth much. So we have to surround ourselves purposely with people that love us and see us and know our potential and know what we're worth. And that's what Legion is all about. And I think it's just amazing what you do. So, and if folks want to check out Legion, check out the Facebook page. Website will be up someday soon. Keep an eye on Kamryn. She's a star to watch out for. She's going to be doing great things. All right, I'm going to run this last 2.5 miles back to my car.